The moment my wife slammed the glossy travel brochure down on the kitchen counter, I knew we were heading toward a clash neither of us could avoid. "This is where we should be going this summer," she announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she pointed at turquoise waters and luxury cabanas on some far-flung island. But all I could see were the numbers flashing in my mind, the unpaid bills stacked on my desk, and the quiet pressure of reality that had been gnawing at me for months. She wanted an escape. I needed her to see the truth. And that truth, as painful as it was to admit, was about to break the illusion she had been clinging to. The story I'm about to share is not just about a vacation that never happened, but about the harsh confrontation between fantasy and responsibility, and the wake-up call that forever shifted the way we saw our marriage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Daniel Torres, and I work as a mid-level project manager at a logistics firm in Denver, Colorado. I've always been the type of man who measures things twice before cutting once, the kind who double-checks numbers and plays life cautiously. My wife, Lena, on the other hand, has always carried a streak of boldness and extravagance. When we first met, that spark was intoxicating to me. She was adventurous, spontaneous, and unapologetically herself. She had dreams of traveling the world, of sipping cocktails on beaches, of living life with no boundaries. I admired that at the time because I had lived most of my early life inside a careful box. But as years passed and responsibilities piled up, her adventurousness transformed into demands that my salary and our budget couldn't possibly meet. Our marriage had been built on compromises, as all marriages are, but increasingly those compromises felt one-sided. I bent and adjusted, always trying to stretch our finances a little further, finding ways to make her happy without going bankrupt. I told myself it was temporary, that once I got promoted, or once a bonus came through, we could live the way she wanted. But the promotions came slower than we hoped. The bonuses went to household emergencies, and yet her appetite for more seemed to grow with every year. The latest fixation was this luxury vacation she had spotted on social media. She followed influencers who flaunted their getaways, comparing herself constantly to women who seemed to be living in endless paradise. And though I didn't begrudge her for wanting nice things, I couldn't ignore the balance sheets that told me we were already stretched thin. That night, as she waved the brochure in my face, I listened to her describe in vivid detail the resort's infinity pools, the guided snorkeling trips, the gourmet dinners overlooking the ocean. Her voice was filled with hope, and for a fleeting moment, I wished I could just say yes, book the tickets, and let her live out that fantasy. But I also thought about the credit card bills that had been inching higher every month, the car loan payment that was due next week, and the mortgage that consumed a massive portion of my paycheck. The thought of adding thousands more in debt for a week of indulgence was enough to send a cold shiver down my spine. "Lena," I said carefully, trying to keep my tone neutral, "do you have any idea how much this costs?" She brushed me off with a casual wave. "We deserve it. We've been through so much stress. Don't you think it's time we enjoyed ourselves for once?" Her words cut because, in a way, she was right. We had been under immense stress. Between work deadlines, our daughter's school tuition, and the general exhaustion of adulthood, the thought of an escape was tempting even for me. But the difference was, I couldn't allow myself to chase temporary relief at the cost of long-term stability. As she talked, I noticed the subtle shift in her tone, the way she leaned forward with impatience, as though she was tired of me being the wet blanket. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a vacation. It was about how differently we saw the world, how differently we valued things. For her, happiness was a luxury resort and an Instagram post that proved we were living well. For me, happiness was a roof over our heads, the security of knowing bills were paid, and the quiet satisfaction of not owing anyone money. That clash of philosophies had always been there, hidden beneath small disagreements, but now it stood front and center, threatening to explode. I knew I had to handle it carefully. If I came across as too harsh, she would accuse me of being controlling or stingy. If I gave in, I would resent her for pushing us into financial chaos. So I asked her to sit down with me at the dining table. I pulled out my laptop, opened the spreadsheet I had been maintaining for years, and showed her the numbers, every expense, every debt, every looming obligation. I thought that seeing the math laid out in black and white would make her pause, would help her understand. Instead, she frowned, tapped her nails on the table, and said, "You always make it about money. Why can't you ever think about how we feel?" That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because in her mind, I wasn't just saying no to a vacation. I was saying no to joy, no to her vision of what life should be. I felt the tension building inside me, a mix of frustration and sadness. And though I held back my harsher words, I knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger conflict. In the days that followed that first heated conversation about the vacation, I found myself reflecting on how Lena and I had gotten here, to this widening gulf between her expectations and my cautious pragmatism. When we first met nearly a decade ago, I was immediately drawn to her energy. She was working as a marketing assistant at a local boutique agency, and she had this uncanny ability to light up a room just by walking into it. I was quieter, more reserved, working long hours in an office where numbers, charts, and deadlines dictated the rhythm of my life. Our differences seemed complementary back then. She pulled me out of my shell, encouraged me to try new things, to live a little more spontaneously. I, in turn, offered her stability, a grounding presence when her ideas sometimes soared too far into the clouds. At least, that's how I thought it worked in the beginning. Back then, before marriage and responsibilities, our dates often involved little adventures, weekend road trips, new restaurants, concerts under the stars. I remember one summer night when she surprised me with tickets to a jazz festival by the lake. I had been hesitant, worried about the cost and the fact that I had an early meeting the next morning, but she convinced me to go. We danced barefoot on the grass, ate overpriced food from food trucks, and laughed until my cheeks hurt. That was Lena at her best, spirited, full of life, determined to squeeze joy from every moment. I loved that about her, and part of me still does. But what I didn't realize then was how deeply tied her happiness was to experiences that cost money, often more money than I was comfortable spending. The early years of our marriage were cushioned by the fact that we were newlyweds, high on the thrill of being together and still somewhat shielded from bigger financial burdens. Rent was manageable, we didn't have kids yet, and we convinced ourselves that life would only get easier as we climbed the ladder of success. But reality has a way of creeping in. A year into our marriage, Lena lost her job during a round of agency layoffs. She tried freelancing for a while, but the income was unpredictable, and eventually she decided to step back from work altogether, saying she wanted to focus on starting a family. I agreed because at the time, I felt capable of carrying us both. I thought it was temporary. Then our daughter, Sophia, was born, and overnight, our expenses multiplied: hospital bills, baby supplies, childcare. Suddenly, the safety cushion we thought we had shrank into nothingness. Even then, I tried to maintain some semblance of balance. I didn't mind tightening my belt if it meant Lena and Sophia were cared for. I picked up side projects, worked overtime, and kept telling myself this was part of being a husband and a father. But Lena's tastes didn't shrink with our budget. If anything, they expanded. She wanted Sophia in the best preschool. She wanted us to upgrade our car for safety. She wanted brand-name clothes, even though I argued cheaper ones would do just fine. I gave in more often than I'd like to admit, partly out of guilt, and partly because I wanted peace at home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The strain began to show more clearly about 3 years ago when we moved into our current house. It was a decent place, nothing extravagant, but still a stretch financially. I took out a mortgage that made me nervous, but Lena insisted it was important for Sophia to grow up in a good neighborhood. I convinced myself it was the right choice, and maybe in some ways it was, but it meant I had to watch every penny even more carefully. I set up spreadsheets, tracked every expense, and tried to keep us from drowning. Meanwhile, Lena seemed almost oblivious to the sacrifices being made behind the scenes. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs. The first cracks showed in small arguments. She wanted to host dinner parties like her friends did, but I would remind her of the grocery budget. She wanted to replace furniture that was barely a year old, and I would point out the loan we were still paying off. Each time she accused me of being stingy, of not understanding the importance of enjoying life. Each time I swallowed my frustration and tried to compromise. But compromise has limits, and it felt like mine were constantly being tested. It was during those years that I started realizing how much of our dynamic revolved around me playing the role of the responsible one while she got to dream big. I tried to tell myself it was just phases, that eventually she'd understand. But the truth is, Lena has always believed that life is meant to be lived in big, dramatic strokes. And in her eyes, I was the obstacle preventing that canvas from being painted the way she wanted. So when she brought up this luxury vacation, it wasn't coming out of nowhere. It was the culmination of years of simmering tension, her insistence on chasing the lifestyle she thought we should have, and my desperate attempts to keep us afloat. The glossy images in that brochure were just the latest manifestation of a deeper conflict between us, her desire for glamour and my fear of financial collapse. At that point, I began to question myself too. Was I too cautious? Was I depriving us of joy because I was afraid to take risks? Those doubts haunted me, because no one wants to be the person who drags down their family with endless talk of bills and budgets. And yet, the numbers didn't lie. I knew, deep down, that if we didn't start making changes, if Lena didn't come to terms with the reality of our situation, we'd end up in a hole so deep we might never crawl out. That was the stage our marriage was in when the vacation talk resurfaced with full force. The foundation had already been laid, brick by brick, through years of small disagreements and unresolved differences. The brochure wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a spark thrown into a pile of dry kindling that had been accumulating for far too long. The vacation idea didn't fade away like I had hoped after showing Lena the numbers. If anything, it became a point of obsession for her, the kind of thing she would weave into conversations regardless of the topic. She would casually mention how other couples we knew had traveled recently, dropping names of acquaintances who posted pictures of their trips to Greece, Bali, or the Bahamas. Each mention carried an undercurrent of comparison, as if to say, why not us? Why are we the ones missing out? I tried to shrug it off, but inside, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the dread of another argument brewing. One Friday evening, I came home from work later than usual, exhausted from a week filled with back-to-back meetings and deadlines. I opened the door to find Lena sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, a dozen tabs of vacation packages glowing on the screen. She looked up, her face lit with excitement, and declared, "I found the perfect deal. It's practically a steal for what they're offering." I set my bag down slowly, my body heavy with fatigue, and asked her how much it was. She rattled off a figure that made my stomach drop, still thousands of dollars more than what we had set aside in savings. I couldn't believe she was calling it a bargain. I sat down across from her, rubbing my temples, and tried once again to explain where we stood financially. I pointed out the car payment due in 2 weeks, Sophia's upcoming tuition installment, and the rising utility bills as winter approached. I reminded her that we didn't have an emergency fund strong enough to cover even a minor setback, let alone splurging on a trip halfway across the world. But Lena was unmoved. "We can't live our lives just paying bills, Daniel. That's not living, that's just surviving," she said, her tone firm, almost defiant. Her words stung because they implied that all my efforts to keep us secure, all the sacrifices I made, were meaningless in her eyes. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, the conversation turned into a full-blown argument. Lena accused me of being joyless, of always hiding behind spreadsheets and excuses. I countered by asking her why she couldn't see the bigger picture, why she insisted on chasing luxuries when our foundation was shaky. The fight ended with her storming upstairs, slamming the bedroom door while I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the muted television. I felt drained, as though no matter how I framed it, she refused to accept reality. The tension seeped into the following days. Lena grew more distant, giving me curt responses and avoiding deeper conversations. She spent more time on her phone, scrolling through travel blogs and Instagram accounts, her eyes lighting up at places we couldn't afford. I, meanwhile, buried myself in work, trying to distract myself from the growing divide between us. Even Sophia noticed the shift. One morning, as I was packing her lunch, she asked me, "Why is Mommy mad at you?" I forced a smile and said something vague about grown-up disagreements. But inside, it broke me that our daughter was picking up on the rift. In quieter moments, I replayed our arguments in my head, wondering if I had been too harsh or too rigid. Maybe I should loosen up, let go a little, and try to meet Lena halfway. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no real halfway in this situation. A vacation like the one she wanted wasn't a small compromise. It was a massive financial leap that would set us back months, maybe years. Compromise was going out to a nicer restaurant once in a while, or saving up slowly for a modest family trip within the country, not booking an extravagant getaway on borrowed money. One evening, I tried a different approach. Instead of shutting her ideas down outright, I suggested alternatives. What if we planned something closer, like a road trip to California? Or maybe a week in Florida? It would still be fun, and Sophia would love it. I thought presenting options might show her I wasn't opposed to vacations altogether, just the scale of what she was envisioning. But Lena brushed it off immediately. That's not the same. Everyone does that. I want something special, something memorable. Her refusal stung because it reinforced the idea that nothing short of luxury would satisfy her. It became clear to me that her fixation on this vacation was less about the trip itself and more about what it represented. She wanted validation, a marker that we were doing well, that our lives measured up to those of the people she compared herself to online. In her eyes, an expensive vacation was proof that we were successful, that we were more than just average. And in a world where appearances mattered so much to her, settling for less felt like failure. For me, it was the exact opposite. Success was keeping the lights on, paying off debts, and knowing I could provide for my family without sinking into anxiety every time a bill arrived. As the weeks passed, the strain only grew heavier. I found myself avoiding certain conversations just to keep the peace, but the silence between us felt just as suffocating as the arguments. Lena, meanwhile, became more vocal with her friends, often venting about how stingy I was or how I never wanted to do anything fun. Word got back to me through mutual acquaintances, and while I tried to shrug it off, it hurt to know that she was painting me as the villain to others. By this point, I realized we were standing at the edge of something much larger than a vacation dispute. This was about values, about the very foundation of our marriage. And though I didn't know it yet, the breaking point was closer than I imagined. The strange thing about tension in a marriage is how it seeps into the smallest corners of daily life, transforming even ordinary routines into battlegrounds. By the time winter came around, the argument about the vacation had become less of a single conversation and more of an unspoken presence in our home, a shadow hanging over every interaction. Lena would bring it up in subtle ways, leaving travel magazines on the coffee table, showing me videos of families enjoying island getaways, or dropping hints during dinner about how life is too short to just work and pay bills. I tried to brush off the remarks, but each one chipped away at me, reminding me of the widening chasm between us. During the holiday season, when most families were gathering cheerfully, ours felt tense and fragile. We hosted a small Christmas dinner for Lena's sister and her husband Marcus. Over dessert, Marcus casually mentioned that he and his wife were planning a trip to Italy the following summer. Lena's eyes lit up, and she jumped into the conversation with an enthusiasm that stung me. "That sounds amazing. Daniel and I were just talking about doing something similar," she said, throwing me a glance that was equal parts challenge and expectation. I forced a smile, nodding politely, but inside I felt cornered. She had turned our private disagreement into a public performance, making it seem like I was already on board with something I had no intention of approving. Later that night, after the guests left and the dishes were done, I confronted her about it. "Why would you say that? You know we're not planning a trip like that." She shrugged, as though it were nothing. "I didn't want to look like we're the only ones stuck at home, Daniel. Do you want everyone to think we're boring and broke?" Her words were sharp, and I felt them dig in deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about the vacation anymore. It was about pride, image, and the way she wanted others to perceive us. She wasn't content with quiet stability. She wanted to project glamour, even if it was hollow. The irony was that Lena wasn't heartless or incapable of love. She adored Sophia, doted on her, and made sure she had the best of everything. She wasn't lazy either. She kept the house running and often took on small freelance projects here and there, though the income was irregular. But her priorities were shaped by a longing for recognition, for the kind of life she believed we deserved. I could see that desire in her every time she scrolled through her phone, sighing at someone else's vacation photos or luxury purchases. And while I sympathized with the human desire to want more, I also resented being cast as the villain who stood in the way of her dreams. One particularly cold January evening, we had another argument that spiraled out of control. It started innocently enough. I had suggested that we focus on rebuilding our emergency fund this year, given how precarious things felt with the economy. Lena reacted with visible frustration. "Every year it's the same. Save this, save that. When do we actually get to live?" I tried to reason with her, saying that living meant security, not extravagance. She raised her voice, accusing me of being controlling, of denying her happiness. The shouting woke Sophia, who came downstairs rubbing her eyes, asking why we were fighting. That moment broke me. Seeing our daughter caught in the crossfire made me realize how much damage this conflict was doing, not just to us, but to her as well. I hugged her tightly, reassuring her, while Lena retreated upstairs in silence. In the days that followed, I began noticing cracks not just in our marriage, but in my own emotional resilience. I was becoming more irritable at work, snapping at colleagues over minor mistakes. I had trouble sleeping, lying awake at night running numbers in my head, wondering how to bridge the gap between Lena's desires and our reality. I even considered picking up another part-time gig, just to quiet the constant arguments, but deep down I knew it wouldn't be enough. No matter how much extra income I brought in, Lena's expectations would rise to meet it. The problem wasn't the amount of money, it was the way we viewed life itself. That realization came into sharp focus one Saturday when we took Sophia to a birthday party. The party was held at a rented indoor playground, complete with decorations, entertainers, and catered food. Lena spent most of the time chatting with the other mothers, many of whom were casually discussing their latest trips or upcoming plans. I overheard her laughing along, mentioning once again that we were planning something big soon. She glanced at me across the room, her smile wide but her eyes daring me to contradict her. I stayed quiet, but the pit in my stomach grew heavier. On the drive home, Sophia fell asleep in the back seat, her small head leaning against the car seat. Lena, meanwhile, launched into yet another pitch about how memories are what matter, not money, and how Sophia would cherish experiences more than anything else. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, biting back the urge to explode. I wanted to tell her that Sophia didn't need an exotic island to feel loved, that she needed stability, safety, and parents who weren't at each other's throats. But I also knew that saying those words would only spark another argument. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the dim light of the lamp. I felt trapped in a cycle, torn between love for my wife and the crushing reality of her expectations. I knew that something had to give, that we couldn't keep circling the same argument without breaking. And though I didn't realize it yet, the breaking point was coming, closer and sharper than I ever imagined. It was February when the first real warning signs began to surface in a way that I could no longer dismiss as simple disagreements or differences in perspective. Up until then, the arguments over the vacation had felt like just another recurring battle in our ongoing struggle between responsibility and indulgence. But now, the tension was beginning to take root in ways that shook me. One evening, as I was sorting through the stack of envelopes that had arrived in the mail, I noticed a late notice tucked in between the usual bills. It was from the electric company, a sharp red stamp across the top that read, "Past due." My heart sank as I checked the date and realized that the payment, which I thought I had scheduled, had been delayed because our account balance had dipped lower than expected after one of Lena's recent online shopping sprees. When I confronted her about it later that night, she brushed it off as though it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "It's just one bill, Daniel. Don't overreact. We'll pay it tomorrow." But what unsettled me wasn't the single bill, it was the casualness with which she dismissed the weight of it. To me, that late notice was a glaring red flag, a sign that we were teetering on the edge of losing control. To her, it was merely a hiccup, a small obstacle to step over on the way to something more glamorous. That disparity in how we viewed the situation gnawed at me, making me realize just how far apart our definitions of stability had grown. The following week, Lena escalated the vacation talk into something more concrete. She sent me a link in the middle of my workday, urging me to check out a package deal that included airfare, hotel, and all-inclusive dining. I clicked on it during my lunch break and nearly choked on my sandwich when I saw the price. I messaged her back, reminding her of our financial situation, but she replied with, "We'll figure it out. We always do." That phrase, once comforting in the early years of our marriage, now sounded like a reckless mantra, a justification for ignoring reality. It was as if she had convinced herself that money would somehow magically stretch to cover whatever desires came her way, while I was left carrying the burden of figuring out how to make it actually happen. By March, the arguments had become so frequent that even Sophia began avoiding certain topics around us. She was only 7, but children notice more than we give them credit for. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, Sophia asked if we could go to Disneyland someday, her eyes wide with innocence. Before I could answer, Lena jumped in with a bright smile, promising, "Of course we will, sweetheart. Maybe even sooner than you think." I looked at her across the table, stunned by her words. Sophia beamed, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes, while I sat there silently fuming. Lena was making promises she had no idea how to keep, dragging our daughter into her fantasies and placing me in the position of the bad guy if they didn't come true. The financial stress began showing up in other subtle ways as well. My credit card balances, which I had always managed carefully, started creeping higher. Each month I made the minimum payments plus a little extra, but it wasn't enough to keep the balances from growing. I noticed more charges that Lena had made without telling me. New clothes, spa appointments, even a fancy dinner with a friend. When I confronted her about it, she insisted that she deserved to treat herself once in a while, that her mental health depended on it. I wanted to argue, to demand accountability, but every time I opened my mouth, the weight of exhaustion silenced me. It felt like shouting into the wind, futile and draining. Meanwhile, her fixation on the vacation intensified. She started bringing brochures home, leaving them on the counter where I couldn't miss them, circling packages with bright red marker like a child making a Christmas list. It was almost as if she believed that persistence alone would bend me to her will. And in some ways it worked. I found myself second-guessing my own instincts, wondering if maybe I was being too harsh, too stingy, too fearful of life. But every time I looked at the numbers, every time I stared at the late notice or the growing balance on my credit card statement, I knew I couldn't give in. The strain began manifesting in our relationship in more personal ways. Our intimacy waned, replaced by a cold distance that neither of us seemed willing to bridge. Conversations became transactional. Who was picking up Sophia from school? What groceries we needed? Which bills were due? The warmth that had once been the core of our marriage felt buried beneath layers of resentment and unspoken words. I missed the Lena I fell in love with, the woman who had lit up my life with her energy and spontaneity, but I couldn't ignore the reality of the woman she had become, someone whose desires seemed insatiable and detached from the life we could realistically sustain. It was around this time that I started seeking small moments of peace outside the home. I lingered longer at work, not because I had to, but because the quiet hum of the office was preferable to the tense silence waiting for me at home. I stopped bringing up finances altogether, choosing instead to nod or remain quiet whenever Lena launched into another pitch about the trip. But silence isn't resolution. It's avoidance. And the more I avoided, the more emboldened she became, mistaking my lack of response for eventual agreement. One night, while reviewing our bank account, I noticed that Lena had withdrawn a significant amount of money without telling me. When I asked her about it, she admitted she had placed a deposit on one of the vacation packages she'd been eyeing, convinced that if she took the first step, I would have no choice but to follow through. I stared at her, speechless, as she explained it like it was some kind of strategic move. My hands trembled with anger and disbelief. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a betrayal of trust, a unilateral decision that endangered everything I had been working to protect. In that moment, I realized the warning signs were no longer subtle. They were glaring, impossible to ignore, and they pointed toward a breaking point we could no longer avoid. After Lena admitted to putting down a deposit on the vacation, something in the air between us shifted in a way that felt irreversible. I no longer saw her persistence as harmless dreaming. I saw it as a deliberate act of recklessness, a choice that disregarded both our reality and the trust that bound us as a couple. In the days that followed, I noticed myself withdrawing further. I still performed my duties as a husband and father, but emotionally, I was drifting. I moved through the motions like an actor in a play, knowing my lines but unable to feel the script. Even Sophia sensed the tension, though she didn't understand it. One evening she asked, "Daddy, why don't you smile at Mommy anymore?" And my heart broke. How could I explain to a child that her parents were standing on opposite sides of a widening canyon? Lena, however, seemed emboldened after her deposit. She began speaking about the trip as though it were already set in stone. She talked to Sophia about the beach, about the hotel pool, about how much fun they were going to have. She even told her sister during a phone call that we had finally decided to take the plunge. When I overheard that, I felt the heat rise in my chest. She hadn't just taken our money without consulting me. She was rewriting the narrative, casting me as the supportive partner who was on board all along. It was manipulation disguised as optimism, and I couldn't stand it. By April, the bills were stacking up faster than I could juggle them. The car needed new tires. Sophia's school fees came due, and the rising cost of groceries left me staring at receipts in disbelief. I did the math a dozen times, searching for a way to make the numbers work, but they simply didn't. We were living at the edge of our means, and Lena's obsession with this vacation was pushing us dangerously close to falling off. One night, after Sophia went to bed, I sat Lena down at the kitchen table with a stack of bills in front of us. I laid it out in plain numbers: what we owed, what we earned, what was left over. "Do you see this?" I asked, my voice taut. "There's nothing extra. Not for a trip, not for shopping sprees, not for anything. We are barely staying afloat." Instead of the realization I had hoped for, she scoffed. "Daniel, you always make it sound worse than it is. People live with debt all the time. We'll be fine." She pushed the papers aside like they were a nuisance, an obstacle to her fantasy. I stared at her, stunned by the dismissal, and realized then that she wasn't just in denial. She was actively choosing it. She was willing to gamble with our stability for the fleeting satisfaction of luxury. That realization hit me harder than any argument we'd had before because it revealed a fundamental rift in our values. The arguments escalated from there, both in frequency and intensity. There were nights when we screamed at each other until our throats were raw, Sophia crying in her room down the hall. There were mornings when we couldn't look at each other, the silence between us heavier than the shouting had ever been. I began sleeping on the couch more often, telling myself it was to give her space, but in truth, it was because I couldn't bear lying next to someone who felt like a stranger. My chest ached constantly, not just from the stress, but from the grief of realizing that the woman I had once trusted with everything was no longer someone I recognized. Then came the breaking point. I arrived home one Friday evening to find Lena giddy, her eyes sparkling as if she had just won the lottery. She thrust a printed confirmation into my hands, a finalized booking for the vacation. She had gone ahead and paid the rest of the deposit, using our joint savings account without my knowledge. I scanned the paper in disbelief, the numbers glaring up at me like a cruel joke. Thousands of dollars, gone in an instant. Money I had painstakingly set aside for emergencies, siphoned off for a week of indulgence. I looked at her, my hands shaking, my vision blurring with rage. "How could you do this without asking me?" I demanded. She crossed her arms, her chin lifted defiantly. "Because if I wait for you, we'll never go anywhere, Daniel. You'll always find an excuse. Sometimes you just have to live." The sheer audacity of her words sent me reeling. I wasn't against living. I wasn't against joy or experiences. But I was against gambling with the foundation of our lives for the sake of a fleeting escape. That night, the dam inside me broke. I told her everything I had bottled up. The resentment, the exhaustion, the heartbreak. I told her how betrayed I felt, how her choices had driven a wedge into our marriage, how I no longer recognized the woman I married. My voice cracked as I said, "You've turned me into the enemy, Lena. You've made me the villain for trying to keep us safe. But I can't carry this alone anymore." She fired back, accusing me of being controlling, of suffocating her, of refusing to let her enjoy life. Her words cut deep, because I could see that in her eyes, she truly believed it. We weren't just disagreeing on finances anymore. We were rewriting each other's roles in the story of our marriage. To her, I was the joyless miser holding her back. To me, she was the reckless dreamer threatening to destroy everything we had built. The space between those perspectives felt like an abyss, and I didn't know if there was any bridge left to cross it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship in my head. The laughter we once shared, the promises we once made, the love that had once been enough to weather any storm. And now? Now we were two people locked in a battle neither of us seemed willing to surrender. The vacation wasn't just a trip anymore. It had become a symbol of everything broken between us. The weekend after Lena finalized the booking, I found myself operating in a haze. I went through the usual motions, making breakfast for Sophia, mowing the lawn, catching up on some work emails. But my mind was consumed with the weight of what had happened. Every time I glanced at the calendar on the fridge, The circled dates of the upcoming trip stared back at me like a countdown to disaster. Lena acted as if nothing was wrong, humming to herself while folding laundry or scrolling through her phone to look up restaurants and tourist spots at the vacation destination. Her excitement was so out of step with my despair that I wondered if we were even living in the same reality anymore. To her, this was a dream finally coming to life. To me, it was a financial time bomb waiting to detonate. I tried to bury myself in work that week, staying late at the office to avoid the tension at home. But avoidance was only temporary. Every evening when I walked through the door, the sight of Lena planning the trip brought everything rushing back. She began talking about new outfits she wanted to buy for the trip, about excursions and day tours we couldn't miss. Each word landed like a blow. I wanted to scream, to remind her that we were sinking under bills already, that the savings account was practically drained. But instead, I clenched my jaw and said little, because I knew if I let myself explode again, it would only further traumatize Sophia. The last thing I wanted was for her childhood memories to be filled with the echoes of our shouting. But even silence couldn't protect her forever. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Lena brought up the vacation again, this time turning her attention toward Sophia. She painted such vivid pictures of sandy beaches and crystal-clear water that Sophia's eyes lit up with pure excitement. "Daddy, I can't wait to swim with you in the ocean," she exclaimed. The innocence of her voice made my heart ache. She didn't know that behind this dream lurked the reality of overdue bills and dwindling accounts. She only knew what her mother was feeding her, promises of happiness. And when she looked at me with those hopeful eyes, I felt like the cruelest person in the world for wanting to shatter that illusion. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, I confronted Lena again. This time, I was calmer but more resolute. "You've involved her in this now," I said, my voice low but steady. "You've made her believe in something that might break apart before it even happens. Do you understand how unfair that is to her?" Lena rolled her eyes, dismissing my concern. "She's a child, Daniel. She deserves joy. Don't you want her to have good memories?" I shook my head in disbelief. "Of course I do. But good memories shouldn't come at the cost of our stability. Do you want her to remember vacations, or do you want her to remember us fighting over money, struggling to keep the lights on?" For a brief moment, I thought my words might have reached her. She faltered, her expression softening, but just as quickly she snapped back, accusing me of exaggerating again. The more she clung to her fantasy, the more I felt myself unraveling. I began confiding in my older brother Marcus, who had always been pragmatic and straightforward. Over coffee one afternoon, I laid everything out. Lena's spending, the vacation deposit, the bills, the fights. Marcus listened quietly, his brow furrowed, and when I finished, he didn't mince words. "Dan, she's not just being careless, she's being irresponsible with your entire family's future. If she can't see that, then you need to decide how much longer you're willing to carry it." His words hit me like a hammer, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. It was validation I desperately needed, yet it also forced me to confront a terrifying question. What if Lena never changed? That question haunted me over the following weeks. I began scrutinizing every purchase she made, every package that arrived at our doorstep. She seemed to double down, as though my disapproval only fueled her determination. One day, a box arrived containing swimsuits and accessories for the trip, and I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about trust, about whether she valued the sacrifices I was making every single day to keep us afloat. And the more she disregarded my concerns, the more I realized we were no longer partners pulling in the same direction. We were adversaries, locked in a tug-of-war neither of us could win without tearing the rope in two. The breaking point came one afternoon when I received a call from our utility provider. They were warning of a pending disconnection notice if our late payment wasn't resolved within the week. The amount due wasn't astronomical, but it was significant enough to prove what I had been saying all along. We were in no position for luxuries. I paid the bill immediately, but when I told Lena, expecting maybe even a flicker of regret, she brushed it off. "It's just one bill, Daniel. You always act like the sky is falling." Her casual dismissal of something so serious made me realize how deep in denial she truly was. That night, I stayed up late, staring at the bank statements spread across the dining table. Every number, every red line, every overdue notice screamed the same truth. We couldn't afford this vacation. Not now, not with the way things were. And yet Lena was barreling forward, as if the laws of math didn't apply to her. The weight of it all pressed down on me until I felt suffocated. For the first time, the thought crossed my mind. Maybe this marriage wasn't salvageable. Maybe the woman I once believed I could build a life with was too lost in her illusions to come back. It was a thought I hated myself for having, but it lingered in the corners of my mind like a shadow that wouldn't fade. The next morning, Marcus called to check in. I confessed to him what I had been feeling, how close I was to breaking. He was silent for a long moment before finally saying, "Dan, sometimes the reality check isn't just for her. It's for you too. You need to decide what kind of life you're willing to accept. And if she can't meet you there, maybe you already have your answer." His words left me shaken, because deep down I knew he was right. I could no longer keep pretending that Lena's behavior was just a phase. It had become a pattern, one that threatened not just our finances but the very foundation of our family. And as much as it terrified me, I knew the time for hard decisions was drawing near. The night I decided enough was enough came suddenly but not unexpectedly. It was a Wednesday evening, quiet, except for the low hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Lena sat on the couch with her laptop balanced on her knees, scrolling through travel blogs and bookmarking restaurants she wanted us to visit. I had just finished sorting through a fresh stack of bills in the dining room, and the sight of her planning indulgences while I calculated how much longer we could keep the lights on was the final push I needed. I walked into the living room and stood in front of her, forcing her to look up at me. "Lena," I said, my voice heavy but calm, "we need to talk. Now. And this time, you're going to listen." She gave a weary sigh, clearly irritated by my interruption. "Daniel, not this again. I don't want to argue." "This isn't an argument," I replied, my tone sharper. "This is reality, and you can't keep running from it." I set the bills on the coffee table between us. "These are not numbers you can ignore. This is what we actually have. This is what you've left us with after pulling money out of savings." She glanced at the papers but quickly looked back at her screen, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "We'll figure it out, like we always do." "No," I said firmly, louder this time. "We're not figuring it out anymore. We're drowning, Lena, and you're pretending we're learning to swim. But this," I jabbed a finger at the papers, "this is what drowning looks like." Her lips tightened into a thin line. "You're being dramatic." That word, dramatic, set something off inside me. I had been patient. I had been reasonable. I had begged and pleaded for her to see sense. But here she was, belittling me again, dismissing my every concern as if I were a child overreacting. My voice rose, sharper than I intended. "Dramatic? Dramatic is what you call a father getting a call about his utilities being shut off, while his wife spends thousands of dollars on a vacation we can't afford. Dramatic is what you call turning a savings account into your personal piggy bank for fantasies, while our daughter's school fees go unpaid. If that's dramatic, then maybe you should start living in it, because this is the only reality we've got." Her eyes flashed with anger, but I didn't stop. I leaned forward, my voice shaking but steady enough to pierce the wall she had built around herself. "You've been living like money is endless, like joy can be bought at the expense of everything else. But joy built on debt is a lie, and I'm done being the one who cleans up after your lies." For the first time, she fell silent. Her jaw tightened, her eyes darted toward the bills, then back to me. "So what are you saying, Daniel? That we just give up? That we never do anything fun again? That Sophia grows up remembering nothing but work and struggle?" "No," I said softly, though my chest still burned. "I'm saying Sophia deserves parents who put her security above their egos. She deserves stability, a roof over her head, lights that stay on, meals that don't come with credit card interest attached. She deserves to see joy that comes from us being present, not from maxing out accounts to play pretend." She tried to speak, but I raised my hand. "I'm not finished." My voice steadied as I continued. "From this day forward, there will be no more reckless spending, no more secret deposits, no more packages showing up without us talking about it first. If you want to go on this vacation, you can go by yourself, because I'm not sinking this family for it. And if you think you can keep ignoring this, then you need to understand the truth. I won't stay in a marriage where my partner treats survival as optional." The room fell so quiet I could hear the dishwasher cycle end with a click. Lena stared at me, stunned, as if she couldn't quite believe I'd said it. For years she had pushed boundaries, always assuming I would bend. But that night she finally saw I was steel, not clay. My hands trembled from the adrenaline, but my resolve was stronger than it had ever been. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "Are you threatening me? With divorce?" I shook my head. "I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you reality. If this is the life you want, spending without care, dragging us deeper into debt, ignoring every warning sign, then I can't be part of it. That's not a marriage, Lena. That's a trap." For the first time in months, her bravado seemed to crack. She closed the laptop slowly, set it aside, and buried her face in her hands. A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of her uneven breathing. When she finally lifted her face, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I just wanted something good, Daniel," she whispered. "I wanted to feel like we were living, not just surviving." Her words cut me, because I understood the longing behind them. I wanted that too. But I also knew we couldn't build it on foundations of sand. I sat down across from her, exhaustion weighing me down. "I want that too," I admitted. "But you can't keep chasing happiness like it's a credit card purchase. We have to earn it. We have to build it. Or else it's not real, it's just borrowed, and it always comes due." We sat in silence after that, the tension thick but different. For the first time, Lena seemed to actually hear me. She didn't argue, didn't deflect, didn't accuse me of being dramatic. She just sat there, quiet and small, like she was finally facing the truth she had spent so long running from. That night, I didn't sleep on the couch. I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, lying in bed with my back turned to her, wondering if this was the beginning of change or just another pause before the cycle repeated itself. Either way, I knew the line had been drawn. I had delivered the reality check, and whether she accepted it or not would decide the future of our marriage. The morning after our confrontation, the atmosphere in the house was heavier than ever, but it was a different kind of heaviness, less like a storm about to break, and more like the quiet that follows one. Lena moved about the kitchen silently, avoiding my eyes as she made breakfast for Sophia, who chattered happily about a drawing she had made for her teacher. I sat at the table, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold, wondering what this silence really meant. Was it surrender? Reflection? Or was it just another pause before we spiraled back into the same cycle of denial and defiance? I didn't know, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to wait and see, because I had already decided that my future wouldn't be dictated by someone else's refusal to face reality. In the days that followed, there was a noticeable shift. Lena no longer spent hours scrolling through vacation packages or gushing to her friends about plans that weren't sustainable. She still carried an air of disappointment, but there was also something else beneath it. Hesitation, maybe even guilt. Once I caught her staring at the stack of bills on the counter, her expression unreadable, before she quietly picked up a pen and began writing out checks for the ones that were overdue. It wasn't an apology, not in words, but it was a step, and I noted it silently. I didn't thank her or praise her, because it wasn't a favor to me. It was her responsibility too. But inwardly, I felt the smallest flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, the reality check had done more than just draw lines. Sophia, in her innocent way, became a buffer between us. She didn't understand the depth of what was happening, but she sensed enough to know that her parents were not the same as before. She clung more tightly to both of us, asking for bedtime stories from me and baking cookies with Lena on weekends. Her presence reminded me of why I had fought so hard in the first place, not to win an argument, but to protect a foundation that was already showing cracks. Whenever I looked at her, I knew that stability was worth more than any beach trip or luxury hotel. By the end of that month, Lena finally broke her silence in a way that mattered. One evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she held a folded piece of paper. "I canceled the reservation," she said quietly, sliding the paper toward me. I unfolded it to find the confirmation of cancellation, the money, what little could be refunded, already on its way back to our account. I studied her face, waiting for resentment or anger, but all I saw was weariness. "I'm not happy about it," she admitted, her voice fragile, "but I can't ignore what you said anymore. I didn't realize how much I was putting us at risk. I just wanted to escape." For the first time in months, I reached across the table and took her hand. "I know. I said softly, "and I want good things for us too. But we have to earn them the right way, or else they'll never last." Her fingers tightened around mine, and in that moment I felt a flicker of the bond we once shared, fragile but still alive. The journey from that moment wasn't easy. Canceling the vacation didn't magically fix the rift between us, nor did it erase the months of arguments and resentment. Trust, once fractured, doesn't heal overnight. There were still moments when I caught her browsing online shops or talking wistfully about what could have been, and each time, my guard rose instinctively. But there were also new conversations, honest, raw, sometimes uncomfortable, about our finances, our goals, and what we wanted for Sophia's future. For the first time, Lena began asking questions, instead of making assumptions. She asked how much we needed in savings before considering a trip, what kind of budget we could realistically sustain, and what sacrifices we both could make to get there. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and progress felt like a victory. Marcus remained a steady voice in my corner, checking in occasionally to remind me that boundaries weren't cruelty, they were necessity. His words echoed in my mind as I learned to hold firm without hardening into bitterness. Slowly, Lena began to see that my insistence on financial responsibility wasn't about control. It was about care. It was about refusing to gamble Sophia's future for temporary pleasures. Months later, as summer approached, I found myself reflecting on everything we had endured. The bills were caught up, the savings account was slowly recovering, and while there was still tension, there was also a new layer of respect between us. Lena no longer spoke about vacations with reckless enthusiasm. Instead, she mentioned them cautiously, almost tentatively, as though testing the waters of possibility without diving headfirst into fantasy. And I, in turn, allowed myself to imagine a future where a vacation wasn't a threat but a reward, something earned, not stolen from tomorrow's security. One night, as I tucked Sophia into bed, she looked up at me with her wide eyes and asked, "Daddy, are we still going on that beach trip someday?" Her question struck me, but instead of pain, I felt clarity. I kissed her forehead and said, "Yes, sweetheart, one day. But when we go, it'll be because we worked hard for it. And it'll mean even more because of that." She smiled, satisfied, and drifted to sleep with the kind of peace I was still working toward myself. As I stood in the doorway, watching her breathe steadily, I realized something important. The reality check I had given Lena wasn't just for her, it was for me too. It forced me to confront my own tolerance for denial, my own habit of carrying silent burdens without demanding accountability. It taught me that love without responsibility isn't love. It's indulgence. And indulgence, unchecked, always costs more than we can afford. So here I am, months later, with a marriage still fragile but healing, a daughter still innocent but safe, and a deeper understanding of what it means to truly provide for a family. I don't know if Lena and I will ever see eye to eye completely, but I do know that the foundation is stronger than it was before. And if there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give to the people you love isn't a dream vacation or fleeting luxury. Sometimes the greatest gift is reality, the kind that doesn't crumble when the bills come due. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.